When Baron Trump first set foot on the grounds of the International School of Diplomacy, he felt the mix of excitement and uncertainty that always accompanies new beginnings. Tall gates, adorned with engravings of the flags of different countries, opened onto a spacious courtyard surrounded by neat paths and green lawns. Emblems of the school's founding nations were visible on the walls of the buildings, and symbols of friendship and cooperation shone through stained glass windows. It seemed to be the very essence of global diversity. From the very threshold, Barron felt that the atmosphere here was radically different from the previous educational institutions he had attended in his life. Instead of the usual office corridors or the pompous halls of private schools around the world, the interiors were dominated by calm gray tones and a verified functional design, indicating the prevalence of formal style over luxury. In the foyer there was a display case with exhibits from different regions: African masks, Chinese scrolls, Japanese dolls, and European engravings. Above this composition hung a world map with brightly colored marks of the cities from which the current students came. Barron, with his quiet confidence and his tendency to analyze everything around him, walked slowly down the hallway, reading the names of the classrooms named after famous diplomats. Among the signs, he noticed Wilson Hall, Gandhi Lab, and Mandela Wing, all of which subconsciously evoked ideas of cooperation and peace. Suddenly, his gaze fell on a group of classmates standing against the wall, discussing their class schedules. As soon as they saw Barron, they fell silent and looked at each other. He immediately realized that his name and reputation preceded him, even if he himself would prefer to remain in the shadows. He peered into his diary, trying to make sense of his packed schedule: Geopolitics 101, Cross-Cultural Communication, International Economics, Advanced Diplomatic Protocol. The school offered classic courses like literature, math, and history, but they also emphasized the global context. Walking down the hall, he noticed a local magazine, Global Voice, on a bulletin board, which featured student articles about world events. On the cover of one issue, he saw the headline, "Dialogue is the Foundation of Diplomacy," which only confirmed the impressive scope of the educational program. Almost everyone here was the child of diplomats, businessmen, and politicians. Barron quickly realized that socializing with his peers would be a test of his ability to find common ground with people from different cultures. On one floor, he ran into a girl named Ingrid, the daughter of the Swedish ambassador, who was studying Russian literature. She smiled and greeted him first, in perfect English with a soft Scandinavian accent. They exchanged a few polite words about the new school and how difficult it could be to adjust to such a cross-cultural environment. Barron nodded politely, feeling an unfamiliar warmth from the fact that at least someone here was willing to talk openly about his background. However, against the general background of festive openness and friendliness, Barron detected something disturbing. There was a wary disapproval and some glances, whispers about rich and privileged. Students were heard several times in his presence. Rumors that some students here felt hostility towards the elite were transmitted almost imperceptibly, but persistently. At the same time, he noticed that several children, dressed too modestly in comparison with their peers, kept to themselves, and their speeches already hovered with criticism addressed to the golden youth. A typical school might have overlooked this, but the International School of Diplomacy was prepared for global conflict and had a strong support system. In the library, he encountered the school librarian, Marianne, an older woman with an uncanny ability to read the moods of her students. Her kindness and listening skills were a safe haven for many in this ever-changing community. She immediately sensed that Barron was trying to understand and embrace the spirit of the place, and she pointed him in the direction of the school's global charter, a set of rules that encouraged respect, openness, and constructive dialogue. But even she had watched with alarm as the latest issues of the school magazine began to contain articles that hinted at growing discontent with certain political figures. The anonymous columns criticized not only the policies of the great powers but also the personal behavior of the children of elites. Barron read these articles with interest, trying to understand the source of the quiet hatred he had already sensed in the scrutinizing glances of others. With each step he took down the halls, he had a growing sense that something more than mere rivalry was brewing here. By the middle of his first week at the International School of Diplomacy, Barron Trump had begun to get used to the noisy hallways and the bustle between classes. He liked the idea of seeing people from literally all over the world here: Japanese schoolgirls animatedly discussing their prime minister's policies, the son of an Arab ambassador talking about reforms in his native country, a young man from Spain passionately arguing about soccer clubs, and of course, the alumni of European dynasties talking reservedly about their latest summits. But despite all the seeming diversity, Barron increasingly felt an incomprehensible tension in the school. Tuesday was particularly strange. Early in the day, Barron noticed anxious glances from several of his classmates, including Stefania, the haughty daughter of an Italian banker who was used to speaking disparagingly of those she considered not up to par. Usually she just ignored Barron, but this time her gaze was more wary and even angry. In the dining room, as Barron was pouring himself some tea, he suddenly overheard fragments of Stefania's conversation with her friend. "They think they're the boss. This can't go on like this. Maybe they'll finally be put in their place." As soon as the girl noticed Barron standing next to her, she fell silent, her eyes flashing angrily, and quickly left. At lunch, Barron sat with a new acquaintance, Ingrid, a cheerful Swede with an uncanny ability to win people over. She was telling him about her problems with math, and Barron was politely offering to help her understand the concepts of integrals. But in the middle of their conversation, a senior named Amir, the son of an East African consul, silently approached the table. His usually serious face was now deeply troubled. "Excuse me for interrupting," he said quietly, sitting down next to her. "But have you heard that someone has been distributing leaflets in the old wing of the school? Leaflets threatening the rich and privileged. They say that someone there is calling for reprisals or humiliation of those who have money and connections." Ingrid turned pale, and Barron felt something inside him shrink. He realized that the atmosphere of mistrust that he had already noticed was moving to the next level. Later, at the end of the school day, Barron noticed a very unusual scene in the library. A teenager named Raoul, the son of an influential South American governor, was standing near the shelves with political literature. He looked clearly confused and even scared. His classmate Liam, who came from a diplomatic family from Canada, was quietly reprimanding him, waving a leaflet. When Barron tried to approach and ask what had happened, Liam quickly hid the paper in his backpack, and Raoul, noticing Barron's presence, hurried away, angrily muttering an apology. It was obvious that they, too, had learned something disturbing. The mood at school was one of a gathering storm. Somewhere, a storm of resentment was probably brewing, and no one was quite sure how it would manifest. The teachers tried to maintain a routine, but the tense conversations were increasingly leaking into classes. Later that evening, the school's Global Dialogue Club met to discuss the idea of a cross-cultural party, but the conversation unexpectedly turned to complaints about inequality and the internalized snobbery of some students. Barron, who attended the meeting with Ingrid, listened as students from different countries spoke of a sense of injustice. Several hinted that there were hidden messages calling for retribution against the elite. The club's organizers timidly tried to calm the argument. But the conversation ended with 3 members abruptly leaving, angrily declaring that it's time to show this school what's what. Later that night, Barron received a message from an anonymous person in the school chat. "You don't belong here. Go back to your parents with your money." His heart sank. Someone clearly had personal hostility towards him. But what did it mean? Had he somehow offended these people? However, he didn't have to think long. The message disappeared within seconds, as if it had never been there. Barron sat for several minutes, staring at his phone screen, aware that he was becoming part of a conflict he didn't yet fully understand. That same evening, he called his mother to talk about his impressions. After listening to him, she advised him to be himself and not to give in to fear. "You are not there to prove your position to everyone, but to gain knowledge and learn how to communicate with people of different cultures. Be attentive and listen to your heart." This advice, although it sounded ordinary, gave Barron confidence that even in an environment filled with mistrust, it is possible to leave a trace of kindness and calm. In the first days after anonymous threats began circulating around the school, the atmosphere quickly shifted from wary to downright alarming. The constant whispers during recess, the nervous laughter, the snatches of conversations about mysterious bullying, all of it made it feel as if an invisible shadow had already descended on the International School of Diplomacy. Baron Trump, who had spent several evenings searching for answers, felt personally affected. Strange looks and quiet references to privileged families suggested that he might be a target. Soon Ingrid, his friend from Sweden, turned to him for help. Her voice trembled with emotion as she told him how she had received an anonymous note the day before that said, "Your rich friends are paying for your education, while others suffer. It's time to end this inequality." The meaning was obvious. Someone was openly speaking out against children from wealthy families and threatening to set the record straight. Ingrid was afraid that real action might soon follow the threats. Barron reassured her, assuring her that together they would sort this situation out, because he had already received similar signals and understood that such attacks could come from those who harbored a grudge and wanted to destabilize the peaceful life of the school. To figure it out, Barron suggested creating a small team of like-minded people who were ready to investigate the source of the threats. They were immediately joined by Amir, the son of a consul from East Africa, who was always distinguished by his seriousness and attentive attitude to detail, Stephania, who, despite her ostentatious arrogance, also began to receive anonymous letters calling on her to return to her Bohemian Europe, and Liam, a seemingly calm Canadian, but inside he kept a strong sense of justice. Together they agreed to act quietly, so as not to scare off the anonymous person, and if possible, not to attract undue attention to themselves. They found their first clues almost by accident. Amir stumbled upon a file on the school network where someone was compiling dossiers on students who could be considered elite, names, parents' presumed wealth, even photos from social spaces with luxurious events and trips. The list was quite detailed, but there were gaping holes in it, hinting that the author did not yet have complete data on everyone. Barron, looking through these materials, felt a chill of fear. It seemed that the aggressor was very carefully collecting information, striving for something more large-scale than simple threats on paper. At the same time, there were indirect signs of latent discontent among the teachers. Occasionally, one could hear the economics professor complaining about the unfairness of the world, hinting that the new order would soon bring about changes everywhere, even in the elite schools. The literature teacher, Mr. Caldwell, who had previously seemed pleasant and friendly, suddenly began expressing hardline political views in seminars. He complained about the so-called corrupt elite, telling stories about people who had suffered because of old political intrigues. The rumor that Caldwell had been close to a radical political group in the past only added fuel to the fire. However, no one seriously thought that he could be connected with threats, because outwardly he still retained his politeness and professionalism. Meanwhile, Barron's team, wanting to expand their information, began talking to young activists. Some of them were enthusiastic about reforms at the school, but they, too, did not know who was behind the aggressive notes. However, some told of a secret chat on a messaging app where a group of disgruntled students and even one teacher discussed how to make the privileged realize the depth of their unfair lives. Ingrid and Amir conducted a little investigation. They registered fake accounts and tried to ingratiate themselves with the participants of this chat to find out which of the teachers could be the administrators. However, this attempt almost failed when they began asking leading questions, transparently hinting that they would reveal the spies. As the school delved deeper into this strange confrontation, tensions grew. Some children became afraid to come to class, and at the same time, parents were harshly questioned. After all, for diplomatic workers, any scandals could turn into serious problems. The school administration apparently suspected something, but preferred not to provoke panic by conducting their own closed investigation. Barron felt that hushing up questions only exacerbated fear and mistrust. Finally, he decided it was time to act, even at the risk of his own safety. With the support of his close friends, Barron came to the conclusion that the problem could not be solved without the intervention of the students, since the anonymous person, judging by his fanatical rhetoric, was ready to go beyond threats. Stephania, who had initially shown a cold attitude towards him, now surprised everyone with her willingness to help. "I do not want to live in fear," she said one evening at a secret group meeting. "We all deserve the opportunity to study in peace, without hostility and hatred." Her words gave strength to the others. If even such a proud person recognized the need to unite, then the threat was truly serious. As tensions at school reached a breaking point, Barron and his friends finally realized that courage and overheard conversations were not enough to stop the wave of threats. Ingrid, sitting in the school garden under a spreading cedar, quietly told the others that she had received another note, which said, "Your aristocracy will soon collapse, and you will understand what it is like to lose everything." The handwriting and style of the message were as ominous as before, indicating that the author was determined in his intentions. Amir suggested setting a trap to draw the anonymous person into open conflict, but this required facts linking the threats to a specific person. At the same time, Mr. Caldwell, the literature teacher, was making increasingly odd comments at school. He casually mentioned correcting historical injustices, hinted at the inevitability of a new order, and even quoted revolutionary slogans. Under normal circumstances, some students would have considered his unusual statements eccentric, but now every word became a potential clue. Stephanie decided to follow Mr. Caldwell outside of class to find out whether he was really involved in anonymous threats, or just a fan of scary metaphors. Thus a plan was formed. Stephanie, pretending to be an interested literary scholar, would arrange an additional consultation in his office after school. Meanwhile, Barron and Liam would wait nearby to eavesdrop or photograph important evidence if necessary. Ingrid and Amir, citing a sudden history assignment, would remain in the library and, under the guise of searching for books, would monitor the teacher's computer that Mr. Caldwell sometimes used after school. This spy operation seemed risky, because if they were caught, they could all be accused of breaking school rules. Stephanie entered the office, where the walls were covered with portraits of classical writers, and old volumes on the theory of revolutions and manifestos from different eras were gathering dust on the shelves. Caldwell greeted her with a slight smile, but his gaze was suspicious. "You don't usually come to me for advice. What happened?" The girl pretended to be interested in an essay on the tragic fate of dispossessed heroes, and asked him to recommend literature that would supposedly help her delve deeper into social issues. At first, he spoke animatedly about the novels of Dickens and sullenly mentioned the novels of Zola, but then, more enthusiastically, he moved on to describing works glorifying the collapse of the old elites. "Isn't it logical," he said barely audibly, "that those who have owned everything for decades should one day give way to those who are oppressed?" At that moment, Stephanie noticed a tab open on her computer. The file format resembled some kind of text document, in which phrases were visible that were suspiciously reminiscent of the anonymous threats that circulated around the school. Trying not to show her confusion, she tried to keep the conversation calm, while trying to discreetly peek at what was written in the file. To her annoyance, Mr. Caldwell suddenly felt her attention slipping away, and quietly closed the window on the monitor. The girl realized that she had reason to believe that their suspicions were justified, but direct evidence was still lacking. In the next hallway, Liam and Barron, huddled around the corner by a brass statue of an unknown diplomat, listened with bated breath through the half-open door. Liam was ready to burst in at any moment if something went wrong. But everything was quiet, albeit tense. Suddenly, a signal from Amir came over the walkie-talkie, an impromptu chat on the phone. "Library, urgent!" It turned out that Ingrid, having looked into Mr. Caldwell's computer, had found there not only lists of the rich and privileged, but also drafts with obvious hints of threats, with malicious rhetoric about retribution and vengeance. There was no need to wait for further confirmation. The friends realized that they had to act immediately. Liam left Barron in the hallway and raced to the library, and Barron decided it was time to have a direct conversation. He quietly entered the office, where Stephanie was already becoming nervous under the onslaught of questions about her elite, family, and the reasons for her sudden interest in social justice. When Mr. Caldwell saw Barron, he gave him a look in which obvious dislike flared. "What are you doing here?" he asked, and his voice sounded as if he did not expect to meet another representative of the most privileged family in the school. Barron, keeping his cool, replied that he had come to support Stephania, who was looking for inspiration for an essay. But Caldwell sneered. "When you people band together, it smells of hypocrisy." At that moment, a small piece of paper fell out of the teacher's pocket, which he tried to quickly pick up, but did not have time. Stephania saw threatening phrases and a date indicating tomorrow on it. "Were you planning to do something already tomorrow?" she whispered, and her voice sounded either indignant or frightened. Caldwell was confused for a moment, but then, pulling himself together, abruptly took the paper and pressed it to his chest, as if trying to hide it. Now he opened up completely. His face was distorted with rage, and that same fanatical determination flashed in his eyes, which said that there was no way back for him. "You're all just kids hiding behind rich parents," Caldwell said, his voice breaking. "But times are changing, and soon you'll realize that your world is not untouchable." He sounded as if he had truly lost touch with reality. Stephania flinched, and Barron responded calmly, trying to reason with the teacher. "If you have grievances against the world, you shouldn't take them out on innocent students. We're here to learn, not to become victims of someone's revenge." But Caldwell seemed not to hear, his hands shaking with emotion. And then Liam and Amir burst into the office, followed by Ingrid, holding printed documents in their hands, direct evidence of the teacher's guilt. "We know that it was you who wrote all those notes and the threatening letter," Ingrid said in a firm voice. "Your files contain all the drafts with details that match the handwriting." Caldwell was choking with rage, realizing that he was caught red-handed. But before he could answer, the steps of the school administration and security were heard in the hallway, whom the boys had called to stop this insane plan. With an extremely pale face, the teacher only muttered, "You are responsible for the suffering of others. I just wanted justice." And that was the end of his resistance. After the shocking revelation of Teacher Caldwell, the air in the International School of Diplomacy seemed to change, as if a heavy curtain hanging over the corridors had suddenly been torn away. The administration acted quickly and decisively. The principal, together with the dean, called in security and the school psychologist to ensure the safety of the students and to deal with the immediate aftermath of the incident. Caldwell was temporarily isolated, and then, during an emergency meeting with lawyers and representatives of the PTA, it was decided that the teacher should be suspended immediately. News of his arrest quickly spread throughout the school, whispered about in every classroom and in the cafeteria, where students were forced to comprehend that a man who occupied a respected position was preparing a dangerous plan for revenge. Meanwhile, Barron and his friends, Stephania, Ingrid, Amir, and Liam, were trying to recover from the emotional shock. They suddenly felt how much responsibility they had. After all, they had essentially taken on the role of informal investigators. That evening, they were invited to the principal's office, where the members of the faculty council had gathered. The atmosphere was tense and solemn at the same time. The walls of the office were decorated with flags of different countries, and at a large round table sat people who usually only watched the life of the school from the sidelines. The principal, a no-nonsense woman named Marion Verdier, a former diplomat with many years of experience in the Middle East, thanked the boys for their courage. "You have shown that the spirit of this school is alive," she said. "We founded the International School of Diplomacy so that students from all cultures and walks of life could learn to understand each other. You have shown that the values of mutual respect and cooperation can overcome even deeply personal hatred." Her words resonated with everyone present. No one could have imagined that ordinary students would show such tenacity, risking their lives to protect their friends and the school's reputation. The next few days were a time of calm and reflection. Psychologists organized group discussions where everyone could share their fears. Many students who had previously been threatened received support, and felt that they were no longer alone. At school meetings, class teachers encouraged honest conversations about the feelings they had experienced, from the fear of anonymous notes to the realization that a person from the teaching staff was behind it all. The negativity immediately began to fade, because the revelation of the truth brought a sense of safety back to the school. Barron tried to avoid unnecessary attention. Although many now treated him with special respect because he had played an important role in exposing Caldwell, he himself felt a little awkward. His goal was not to turn into a hero. But the presence of a friendly team helped him come to terms with his new status as the savior of the school. Ingrid joked that they should come up with a name for their group, like the Anti-Threat Club, while Amir, more seriously minded, suggested using the situation to launch a program called Unity in Diversity, to finally unite students who were so afraid of differences. Stefania, who had previously seemed arrogant, suddenly opened up to the new experience. She proposed holding a cultural festival where participants from different countries would talk about their food, music, and traditions. The administration approved the project, considering it a symbol of the revival of goodwill and dialogue. One of the most touching moments was the public apology of several students who, out of fear and prejudice, had blamed the threats on a rival group, or simply believed that immigrants and rich people were to blame. They asked for forgiveness from those they had once shunned or condemned. This gesture of reconciliation demonstrated that the final stage of the conflict had not only cleared the air, but had also brought many of the students closer together. The school itself, however, will take a long time to recover from the scandal. One of the journalists of a popular online publication wrote an article about how a real social conflict broke out within the walls of the Pride of the Diplomatic Future. The reputation of the director Marion Verdier was shaken for a while, but her prompt actions and desire to support the students in a difficult moment became an example of responsible management. Parents, having learned about the real scale of the threats, were initially shocked, but then highly appreciated the transparency of the situation and the security measures taken. At the end of the week, the first rehearsal of the Unity in Diversity Festival took place in the auditorium. Stephanie assigned roles, Amir helped with the music, Liam printed posters in several languages, and Ingrid researched recipes for national dishes so that everyone could represent their cultures through their tastes. Barron, watching the enthusiasm, felt a quiet pride in how they had managed to turn fear and mistrust into a rallying cry. When the school choir sang a verse in several languages in a row, the audience applauded them. It was a sign that the era of discord was giving way to hope.